This is the first video tutorial in the animation unit. We'll be using Adobe Flash to create our animations. So if you'll find Flash, open it up. And when you open it for the first time, you'll have something that looks kind of like this. It'll have Create New down the middle. We're going to choose ActionScript 3.0. And we're not going to be doing any coding. It's just to make it easier for us to create a file that other people can view at the end called a Swift file. So I'm going to choose ActionScript 3.0. A couple of things about how this is oriented. This screen here, this white area is called the stage. And the stage is what will actually be seen in our animation. Anything that's here in the gray area won't show up in that. If I have the black arrow selected and nothing else clicked on, in the properties right here, this is the properties, and you can see that FPS stands for frames per second, that the frame rate of this animation by default is 24 frames per second. That means there are 24 still images for every second of animation. And that is tied up with this timeline here. These numbers represent the frames. So this is frame 5, frame 10. Here at frame 24 is when we get to our first second. That can mean that I can draw 24 different images for every second that I want to make of animation. That's a lot of work, so we usually do what's called animating on twos, which means we animate every other frame, which we'll talk about more. The size here, the default Flash size is 550 pixels across by 400 pixels high, and this can change the default color of the stage. I leave that white usually, and then if I need to make any changes of background color, I'll put that on a separate layer and lock it, just like in Photoshop or Illustrator. So I'm going to begin here. I'm going to choose the brush tool, and B is the quick key for that. It's over here in your timeline. I'm going to pull out this toolbox because my screen is too small to show you. At the very bottom of your toolbar, there'll be two round circles, a very small one and a larger one. This is, the smaller one is your brush size options. You only have 8 different brush sizes, and depending on how zoomed in you are, those brushes actually get smaller the more zoomed in you are. So that's a little difficult to work with. You'll also notice that as I draw with the brush, when I let go of the mouse, it smooths it. That is here in my property options under smoothing. If I don't like that, I can turn it to 0, and then it won't change it at all or as much. And if I turn it up, it'll change that as well. I can use the eraser to erase lines that I've drawn, or I can select those lines with the black arrow, either just clicking on them or dragging a box around them and delete them, and that allows me to work. I'm going to put the tools back here. And with the brush tool, B is the quick key, I'm going to draw a small red brush. Also keep in mind that the color, if you want to change the color of your brush, it's the paint bucket one, it's the fill color, not the pencil. So you have to change it there. And I'm going to draw a brush. And if I'm not happy with what I've drawn, I can always just press Control Z and undo it. I think I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, so I have more area to work with here. And I'm going to draw a ball bouncing. It's going to start at this location. It's going to drop to the bottom, bounce, back up right to where it was when it started, and create a loop of that ball bouncing and going back up. Now the main thing I'm trying to teach you as we go through this assignment is dealing with timing. Timing is an essential part of animation. It means that in real life, if I were to drop a ball and film it, then gravity and everything else would come into play and make that ball drop at the speed it should drop. In animation, there's no gravity. I can't set a gravity button. I have to decide how quickly I want something to drop, how it speeds up or slows down as it goes. I have to take care of every single aspect of how something moves. And if I don't, if I'm not careful, then I end up with something like this. So I've created this very quickly. This is a bouncing ball, but it looks weird. And the reason why it looks weird is because the timing of its drop and its ascent are consistent. It stays the same speed as it drops, even though we know, because of gravity, that it should speed up as it drops. Then as it bounces back up, it should slow back down again, which we call slow in and slow out. Things don't just get to full speed immediately. They tend to gradually gain speed, and the same thing with when they stop. They have to slow down first. We create a consistent speed by having the spacing of each frame be consistent. So these are all of the frames together, and you can see that each one of these is basically the same distance as the one before it. And when we play that, it makes it look like it's all going the same speed. But we need it to start very slowly and to pick up speed as it drops, and then to reverse that process on the way back. And the way that we can do that is by changing our spacing. So I'm going to come back here to my project, and I have my first screen. Now the first thing I need to ask myself is, how long do I want it to take to drop and to get back up? And I say, let's do a second to get all the way back up to the beginning again. So at about halfway, at about 12 frames, which would be half a second, I want it to hit the ground. Because I'm animating on 2s, I'm only dealing with the odd numbers. I'm going to draw on frame 1, frame 3, frame 5, frame 7. So instead of doing frame 12, I'm going to just fudge it a little bit and do frame 13 instead. So I'm going to come over here and click 10, 11, 12, 13. I'm going to click so that just frame 13 is selected, and it's selected when it's yellow. And I need to create a new keyframe. A new keyframe is just like a new piece of paper laid on top of the old one. It's going to erase the previous drawing and create a new place where I can draw the change, the animation that I want. So at half a second, I'm going to press F7. That's a really important key to remember. F7 will create a new empty keyframe. And when I press that, you'll see down here that now there's a new empty circle. Anytime you see a circle, that's a place where you can draw. Because it's hollow right now, that means I haven't drawn anything on it. You see back at frame 1 that it is drawn. And in addition to that, when I hit F7, it filled frames 2 through 12 with basically an extension of frame 1. So this entire sequence here from 1 to 12 is all the same frame. In fact, if I draw something on frame 10, you'll see that it actually exists back at frame 1, at frame 5, all the way until my new keyframe. So I have to be very careful not to draw something new unless I've hit F7 and created a new keyframe. Another thing that would be very useful is to be able to see the last thing that I drew. And I can do that by turning on onion skinning, which you'll see down here, this very first white box with the gray box behind it. When I click on that, you'll see, and I'm going to turn up my contrast a little, you should see a very faint ghost of the previous frame. These little brackets that appeared allow me to look back into the past of my animation and eventually into the future of it as well. That's what the right bracket does, so that I can see what I drew before and use that as a reference when I draw the next thing. So I'm going to ask myself at frame 13, that's basically half a second, where do I want the ball to be at that point? And I want it to be hitting the ground. And as another principle of animation, I'm going to have it be a little squashed as it hits the ground. And that might be a little too much, so I'm just going to erase off the edges a little bit. And I'm exaggerating this quite a bit. The real thing probably wouldn't be that squashed, but this will work pretty well, especially because when you draw something like this, people are going to see it for about 1/12 of a second. And so you don't need to be afraid of going a little overboard on your animations. It's going to look really nice when it's played quickly. Now I have 2 frames. I'm going to extend the right bracket here and the left bracket so that I can see it. So at frame 1, at 0 seconds, I have the ball up here. At half a second, it's down here. This process is called pose to pose. It's one of the principles of animation, and it means that I draw the keyframes. I draw the most important parts of an animation. So if somebody's jumping, I might draw them when they're kneeling and getting ready to jump. I might draw another frame when they're in the air, pumping their fist into the air, and then I'll draw a third one when the person is on the ground again. So over 2 seconds of animation, I may draw 3 keyframes. And those frames are the most important poses. Then, in professional animation, they send those keyframes somewhere else where in-between animators would fill in all of the gaps in between to make sure that that animation is smooth. In our case, we're also our in-between animators, but those keyframes help me to get the timing correct. It would be very difficult to get to half a second just guessing, but now I have to. Now, what I'm going to do next here, I'm going to create a new layer. And down here at the very bottom left-hand corner, you can see new layer. I'm going to name that layer 1 that I had from before, ball, and I'm going to call this layer a chart. I'm going to show you an example of a timing chart that is how animators convey to each other how something should be timed. When I'm working on a layer and I have another layer, I'm going to make sure to lock the layer I don't want to be working on. So I'm going to click on ball, and you'll see these little dots under the ball. I can click on that under lock, and it'll lock that layer. It also turns off the onion skin temporarily. And what I want to do is I'm going to draw on this chart as an example. I'm just going to get out a black brush here and get a thin, and I'm going to draw, make sure I'm on the chart layer. I'm just going to draw right on it. Usually this would go like in the top right hand corner, but I'm going to draw it right here. Oh, and another thing that's useful, if I hold down Shift before I start drawing a line, it'll force it to either be perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. So what I have is a timing chart. I have, this is my frame 1, this is my frame 13. And now I am going to try to figure out how to make it look like it's going more slowly through here as it drops. And the way that I do that is by having more drawings closer together here at the top. The easiest way to do this is to think in halves. It's always easier to cut something in half than it is to cut something in a third or a fourth, or to eyeball that. So one of my drawings is going to be right here in the half. And I'm going to have to ask myself, how many frames do I need here? So I have frame 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. That's 7 total frames that I need to have to get from the top to the bottom. So I need 7 of these little hashes. So I've got 3 right now. I'm going to cut this in half too. I want it to slow in so that it gradually picks up speed. So I'm going to cut it in half again up here at the top. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to cut it in half again. That's 5. I'm going to cut it in half again. That's 6, and I need 1 more. Now, something that I've seen that animators sometimes recommend is doing a favor. What that means is it's a cushion before something makes contact with somewhere. And so I could create my 7th frame, or my last frame, down here as the favor. And that's as it hits the ground before it stomps. Or, if you prefer, I could just cut this one on the top in half again to have my 7 frames, whatever you decide. I think it looks pretty good if I do one that's kind of close to the edge here as the favor. And so now I'm going to count these. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This would be frame 1, frame 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. And as it slowly increases in speed, the distance between each frame gets larger, which means the distance from here to here is only 3 frames. The distance from here to here is 3 frames. You can see that it's going to travel much further in 3 frames here than it is here. And normally this timing chart, or something similar to it, would be, would be up in this corner and a little bit smaller and on the first frame as a reference. I'm just going to leave that here. I'm going to lock it down so that it won't be used up, or I can't accidentally draw on it. I'm going to unlock the ball layer again. Also notice that when I brought in that chart, it automatically filled in with 1 frame the entire distance of my current animation. If I ever want to make a frame longer, I can always click anywhere inside of that and press F5. That'll make a frame longer. Shift F5 will make a frame shorter, and we'll discuss that more as we go. So now I have my sequence. And it's easiest to start in the halves. So at the halfway point in my drop is actually frame 9. So I'm going to come here to frame 9 on the ball layer. Make sure I'm on the ball, not on the chart. I've locked the chart so that doesn't happen. I'm going to click just on frame 9 so only 9 is selected, and press F7. So now I've removed that frame there and created a new empty keyframe. This is why the onion skin works in both directions. I can still see my frame 1 here. I can still see my frame 13. And I'm going to draw in between those two. So what is it going to look like? I actually want to stretch it out a little bit. Whoops, should get out a red brush. And I'm going to employ a little bit of exaggeration and squash and stretch again to make it look like it's dropping very quickly by having it go down there. And I'm actually going to put the chart behind. You can drag the layers to change the order, just like in many other programs with layers. So now I have frame 1, frame 9, and frame 13. Now I'm going to go half again, which is frame 7. So I'm going to click back here on frame 7, press F7 to create an empty keyframe, and draw what I want it to look like at frame 7. I'm using those onion skinned earlier frames as a reference. Then at frame 5, I want it to look like this. Frame 3, F7 again to create a new keyframe. And then my last one, that favor, right before it hits the ground at 11, I'm going to click on frame 11, press F7 again, and I'm going to have it just brushing up against the ground. And so now, if I just play through this with my mouse, I can see that it's dropping. And an easy way to check it is to hit enter. That's going to let you see it in real time. I like to turn off the onion skin when I'm testing it because it's really easy to get confused with all those extras. And I'm going to turn off the chart by clicking the dot below the eye to turn off the chart. So that feels pretty good. I'm going to take this opportunity. I should have done this right at the beginning, but I want to save this file. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and this is going to save a Flash file. That's an FLA. This is your working file. It's going to let you come back and it'll keep all your frames and your layers and everything else that you've been working on. So it's really good to have. And you'll want to save this somewhere where you can get to it if you have an H drive or something like that. I'm going to call this one ball, and my naming convention is the class period you're in, your last name, your first initial, and then the name of the assignment. And that will save a little, I'll show you right here, save a little red piece of paper called a Flash file. And no one else can really see that unless they have Flash. That's just for you to work on. So I have the first half of this. I want to finish it off with the other half. I think I'm done with my chart. I could just draw it again, follow the chart up the other direction and draw it back up, but I'm going to just copy these frames and reverse them. So if I click down here, be very careful. When you click on a frame, you don't want to click on something and then click on it again. It thinks you want to move that frame. Instead, I just want to click somewhere where it's not currently selected and drag through all the frames. To be able to copy or cut or paste or delete a frame, I have to right-click on the frames that are selected, and then I'm going to choose Copy. Then I'm going to go to the first open spot after my current animation, right-click and choose Paste Frames. And now I have that animation twice. The problem is that they're going down both times. I need to take that frame 14 through 26, right-click on it, and reverse it. That's going to take whatever frames are currently selected and flip the order. In this case, it's going to take it from going from up to down to up. And because it's still slow at the top, it should look like it's slowing down as it comes back up. And a quick way to test this in a real world capacity, if I hold down Control and press Enter, that'll create a Swift movie in the same location with the same name. And I'm just going to toss that chart. I'm going to click on the chart, press Delete. And now when I press Control and Enter, I feel like I have a pretty solid ease in, ease out. And if I want it to be even smoother, I could go into those in-between frames. And I'm not going to do this, but I could come in between 1 and 3 and say which frame is, like, what would be halfway between frame 1 and frame 3. Create a new keyframe at frame 2, hit F7, and draw directly between those two frames. And that could be even smoother. But for the most part, doing animating on twos, doing every other frame, will be more than acceptable for what you're trying to do. And otherwise, you're doubling how much work you need to do. So you're going to try to get through that. I want a Swift file sent to me. So once you're done, if you've already saved the Flash file, every time you press Control and Enter, it's going to create a new copy of the Swift file, which looks like this, and it saves them in the same location. So it should be in the same folder as your Flash file. A Swift is a white piece of paper that has SWF on it, and that, anybody with Flash Player, they can double click on that and open it and play it. So you should be able to send that to anybody, and they should be able to view it if they have a computer from the last 15 years. One last thing, if you have some additional time to finish this up, I'd like you to create a new layer by clicking this new layer button, double click on the name of it and change it to shadow, and use the same technique in every other frame to create a shadow for the ball. So if I come here and I get a black brush, at frame 1, the shadow would be very small. And I can change the order if I actually want the shadow beneath the ball layer. And then if I go to frame 3, where it starts to drop down, press F7, make it a little bit bigger. Go to frame 5, make it a little bit bigger. and I can continue through that and create a shadow for that ball that expands as it gets closer to the ground. And that's just an extra challenge for you if you feel comfortable with the timing there. And so just remember, timing is very important. An easy way to create a slow in is just to cut each of the halves in half and have it follow those. We'll be doing that more through the next couple of assignments as well, so that you can get more comfortable with that. If you get that, turn that in to me. Thanks.